So, as mentioned, I'm Arvi Teikari, the developers of Baba Is You, and I'm going to talk to you about the development of the game and also what it is, as the subtitle says. Because I guess even though Ivan mentioned that all of you know it already, I feel that it might be a good idea to kind of also explain what this Baba Is You is. So my presentation is going to be divided in 4 parts. First of all, I'll say a couple of words of who I am. Then I'm going to talk about what Baba Is You actually is. What is this thing you are going to hear about? Then I'll talk about the origins of the game, like what happened that I'm here talking to you, why do I deserve this? And finally, I had a really hard time coming up with what the subtitle of the final section is, but there I'm going to kind of give some details of the game, of kind of why is it special, I guess. We'll see. And after that, if I have time, I'll either show the game a little bit or take questions, or we'll see what happens. Let's just go leisurely. And at this point, I'll put on my timer because I'm really bad at staying on time. So there we go. Yes. All right. So I'm a Finnish game developer based in Helsinki. I've been interested in making games since actually kindergarten. My cousin had a Super Nintendo system, and I played on that quite a lot. And in the kindergarten I was at, a lot of kids had older siblings, like brothers and sisters, who played games. So when I was a 4-year-old, I drew my own game levels on paper, and many of my friends there did the same, and then we follow the levels with our fingers. So the kind of game development has been with me since the very early stages. And when I was in primary school, a friend of mine showed me Game Maker, the game development tool. And that was super nice because in primary school in Finland, even though we get English education at a certain point, I didn't really understand English at that point. And also I had a young kid's patience. So learning a programming language was kind of out of the question. And even with Game Maker is a program that makes things a lot easier, but it has this kind of a scripting language that you have to use. So it was still kind of difficult for us. So I eventually ended up moving into different things. And over the course of my hobby or career, I mostly concentrated on small experimental games and game jams. I'm a huge fan of game jams. And actually, Baba Is You was made originally at the game jam. So there's kind of a connection between things. There's a couple of these game jams I've enjoyed. No More Sweden sounds kind of scary when you see the name like that, but it's actually a Swedish game jam. It's not against Sweden. And I used to make games as a hobby mostly. I actually went to study a completely different subject because I felt that I would want to. I'll keep moving my mouse so nothing happens. So I wanted to keep game development a hobby because I was afraid of kind of making it a full-time job. There's a lot of these kind of things where people say that it might not be fun anymore if you make it full-time, or it's a very uncertain job. It's hard to earn your living making games, so I went to study something else. But then eventually, making games kind of sucked me in enough that I released my first commercial game, Environmental Station Alpha, in 2015, and then now Baba Is You. And all this is kind of pointless for everyone else but me. But I think a point I want to make is that, as mentioned, I started with Game Maker, which is not like a programming language, but instead this kind of game creation tool, so to say. And I move on to a program called Multimedia Fusion, and it's this kind of family of game creation tools, which are interesting in that they don't require any programming at all. They're completely kind of visual, that you kind of put down things on a grid and things happen. And I think I still use the same program. And I think it's kind of nice because I think a lot of people who want to make games might be afraid of having to learn programming, how to write code. And here I am, a 27-year-old person who still doesn't really know how to program, and I do make commercial games, so that it can happen. It can happen. So if you want to make games, please don't be intimidated. Just do whatever you want. OK, that's enough about me. So let's move on to the actually interesting part of the presentation. So what is Baba Is You? I guess it's easier if I show you a nice little picture of the game itself. So Baba Is You is a turn-based block-pushing game, which is a genre of puzzle games that is fairly old. There are many games in that genre nowadays. And the game basically consists of these different kinds of objects or creatures in the level. There you can see this little creature at the bottom. It's Baba. And another thing the levels consist of are these words that make up sentences. For example, Baba is you. Alternatively, you could have things like wall is stop, or flag is win, or rock is push. There are a lot of options. And the twist of the game, the reason why some people might consider it interesting, is that in these turn-based block-pushing games, what you usually do is that you have some kind of a character you can move around with, and then you have some kinds of pushable objects, often rocks, for example. And then you can use this character to push these rocks around. And in Baba Is You, these words are rocks, these kind of pushable objects. And what this allows you to do is that you can break the rules and create new rules. And actually, apart from, I think, 3 kind of fundamental things in the game, all the rules of the game are expressed in the levels themselves. So you don't have this kind of a situation where, for example, you have this rock you can push around, and the rock is always the thing you push around, or water is always something that you cannot move into, or walls are always something that kind of stop you. But instead, what you can do is, in this example, on the top picture, we have wall is stop, and then flag is win. Baba wants to get to the flag because Baba wants to win, obviously, or often. And on the bottom picture, we can see that Baba actually destroyed the wall is stop rule. And there you can see Baba is happily on top of the wall. The wall is no longer a wall. It's no longer stop. Alternatively, you could have said that wall is win, in which case, in the bottom picture, Baba would actually be winning the level because the flag would no longer be the thing you have to touch to win, but instead the wall would be the thing you want to touch. Or in this other example, we have kind of a similar situation, but Baba is nowhere to be seen. We have wall is stop, Baba is you, and flag is win. And then you can change the rules to say wall is stop, but also wall is you. And then you can move around all the walls in the game, and they are suddenly you, the player. So that's kind of the thing of the game. I think I have had some more points in this earlier slide, so let's go back here. So yeah, just kind of some details about this genre of block-pushing games. It was popularized. How do I even say that word? I don't know. So there's this game called Sokoban. I think it's Japanese in its origin, where you play as this kind of person organizing a storage. So you have boxes of, I don't know, things, and you need to put them into the correct places. So you push those crates into the marked places. And Sokoban kind of started this genre, I think. And over the years, many indie games have kind of followed the same format because it's very, very basic. It's a very classic thing. Some of my favorites include these games called Stephen's Sausage Roll, Snakebird, A Good Snowman is Hard to Build. There are lots of good games there, but these 3 might be my favorites, I think. I recommend trying them out, even though they are pretty difficult. And yeah, I guess I already explained the second point, so let's move on. Yeah, I guess if we have time, I might actually turn on the game and show some more interesting details from how the game works, but we'll see what happens. So, onto the third topic. Where did the game come from? Where I kind of explain what happened, like how did I get the idea and what happened to the idea. Everything is looking fine time-wise. So, as mentioned, I'm a huge fan of game jams. And one of my kind of staple game jams I go to, I try to go there every year. I've missed 1 year so far from the time I've been going there. There's Nordic Game Jam organized in Copenhagen, which, because some game jams are more competitive. A game jam is an event where you go somewhere, or you might do it online, and you make a game under a time limit. And then after the time limit ends, you submit the game, and they might be scored. You might have like a best game, a winner, or you might not have a winner. It really depends on the format of the game jam. And Nordic Game Jam is it's a jam where a winner is picked. There's like a voting period, but it's not that much about winning. It's more about just making a game. Some people go there and take it more seriously. They want to win. Some people go there and just make whatever. And I think that's a really nice balance. I personally enjoy game jams also for the relaxed atmosphere and meeting people. So not having to kind of compete so hard is nice for me. And maybe that's a secret how I got this idea there. I don't know. Anyway, so in 2017, the theme, usually game jams have some kind of a theme, and you might have to follow it, you might not have to follow it, you might even have to break the theme, I don't know. Really depends. But there, the theme was not there. And Nordic Game Jam is usually kind of lax about following the theme. Sorry. And the not there theme made me think of logic operators, specifically not. How you can, in logic, you can have a concept. Let's say you have a concept, baba. Baba means something. And then you can say not baba to kind of reverse the meaning of the term. And I had played a lot of those block pushing games, those Stephen Sausage Roll and so on, before the jam. And so this idea of this not operator and these ideas coming from those puzzle games kind of combined in my head. And I got this mental image of having like a pool of lava, and then there being like ice around the lava or in the lava, and the ice obviously melting in the lava. That's, as far as I know, usually what happens with ice and lava. But then the player would be able to say that ice is not melt, and that would make the ice not melt. Nice. The idea sounded actually kind of bad at first. I felt that, okay, that's an interesting idea, but it probably doesn't work. It's probably going to be a bad game. Sometimes, because at game jams, you don't really have that much time to kind of plan things. Sometimes you just have to prototype something, just go for it, and then you might run into a wall, and that's that. You might still have fun making it. Sometimes you might kind of be lucky and figure out something that is actually fun. So with Baba Is You, I felt that, okay, I'll prototype this idea even though it feels kind of bad. I assume it's not going to work. Then I ended up winning the game jam. So yay, I was happy to be wrong that time. Sometimes it's good to be wrong. But yeah, after winning the game jam though, I should have done something about this. My apologies, it's my bad. After the game jam, I was kind of unsure what to do with the project, because again, with game jams, you usually make something very specifically for the game jam. You don't have much time, you might have to cut corners, you kind of hack things in, so to say. And sometimes the ideas might be interesting in a very small scale, but they cannot be made into like huge full commercial titles, because the idea is so experimental or so small that it has to stay on a small scale. So with Baba Is You, I felt that the game had potential. A lot of people came to tell me that, hey, I like this idea, this has potential. So pretty quickly I felt that, okay, I have to do something with this. But the idea of this kind of changing the rules and moving things around and making things something else than they usually are, I felt that that kind of idea would work really well as a kind of a toy or a sandbox where you can just kind of play around with the words and do whatever you want. Or it could work as a kind of a more hardcore puzzly game I was maybe, because I enjoy difficult puzzle games of a certain type, I was probably already kind of biased towards making a puzzle game, but I was still very unsure at first of which path to go for. And another thing was that people told me that seeing the game Baba Is You played at the Game Jam gave them these kind of philosophical ideas, because in the game you have this Baba is you. You are controlling Baba, but you can also say wall is you or rock is you. Even in some situations, you can say empty is you, in which case the empty space in the world becomes you, the player. And some people felt that the game had some kind of commentary about consciousness, because you can kind of move consciousness around with the you word. And I felt that it was really cool. I didn't realize it myself when making the game, but another thing to kind of ponder about after the Game Jam was to, can I somehow tell a story about consciousness with this idea if I make a full game out of it? But yeah, ultimately, I ended up basically not worrying about the story. I'm not a very good storyteller. I decided to just follow what I want to make and make a puzzle game. So in the end, this uncertainty was kind of, oh well, it worked out. It worked out. So I made a version of the game with some puzzles. I did like 80 puzzles or something, like just any ideas that came into my mind, and sent it to my developer friends and got a lot of feedback over the 2 years it took to develop the game into a full title. And another uncertainty initially, you saw the pictures from the game. It's a very pixelated, very minimalistic, a very bare bones look. So I was at first a bit worried, because people told me at the Game Jam and later on that they felt that the game had potential, that the idea is cool. And I wanted to make a cool game. I wanted to make a game that people want to play. And sometimes making a game that people want to play includes making it look good and sound good. And that's terrible. So I spent some time thinking, like, maybe I should make a 3D game, use Unity or something, make the game really marketable. In the end, no, I was too lazy. I kept the graphics minimalistic, and so that I could make the graphics myself. I didn't have to learn anything new to make them. And also, as far as the audio goes, I'm not really a composer, but I felt that if I were to go with this kind of minimalistic art style, I might as well try to do the music and audio by myself, because I have some ability in that. So I went with this kind of, I guess, risky approach of letting the game look kind of rough and minimalistic and letting the audio be made by a person who doesn't know how to do that. And yeah, then I started developing the game. And as mentioned, it took me about 2 years, almost exactly 2 years from the Nordic Game Jam to releasing the game. And it turned out that it was a lot of fun to just kind of toy around with the project, to just kind of make levels. Oh well, let's say this is part of the plan of the presentation, to have these exciting moments. So when I started the project, I felt that, okay, I don't want to be too greedy. Let's say that I will have like 40 or 60 levels in the game. Like, I stop making levels as soon as I don't get any new ideas for levels. And it turned out that making levels and getting new ideas for the levels was so much fun that I ended up having over 200 levels in the final game. That's nice. A big part of the kind of design of the game was that, because the game has a lot of these different words you can play with. First of all, these objects like Baba and wall, also rock or flag, water, lava, so on. But it also has these like you, win, push, stop. There's a lot of things objects can be, which meant that there were also a lot of interactions between those words. So when I started thinking of what kind of levels I want to make, I often took those words I had and also word ideas I had in my mind, and and then just kind of thought in my mind or on paper or on the computer of what kind of interactions, what would be cool to do with these words. And then when I got this kind of an idea, I use the term reverse engineering. So when I got this idea of, hey, that would be cool to see in a level, I tried to figure out what kind of a level do I have to build so that when the player is playing the level, they have to use that interaction. Can I give a good example, like out of the top of my head? Whoops, sorry. Okay, let's say just as a simple thing, we have a pool of lava, and I felt that it would be super cool. You can say that lava is hot, so the lava is hot, and then you can say something is melt, and if something that is melt touches the lava, that something that is melt gets destroyed. Pretty simple. I guess the ice example I used in the beginning was basically that. And one of these cool interactions that came into mind was that, what if I have a pool of lava, lava is hot, and then let's say Baba is melt, so Baba melts in the lava, you cannot go into the lava, but you could also say lava is melt, so lava would be hot and melt at the same time, and then the lava would melt itself. It sounded cool in my head, so I made a level out of that, and then I kind of reverse engineered a level that requires that interaction. In this specific example, this level is actually in the game, but the next point, unintended solutions. When you design a level like this, when you kind of take the end situation and then try to figure out the beginning situation from that, it's very easy to end up in a situation where there's some kind of an unintended approach where the player can do something else than you thought and solve the level anyway. And in this case, this lava is hot and melt level has an unintended solution that I never fixed, so most people don't solve it the way I thought they would. But sometimes it's a problem. Sometimes I wanted to fix those unintended solutions if they were kind of too uninteresting or too like trivial. But in many situations, it was actually pretty cool that a player can figure out many approaches to a level, so I just kept the unintended solutions in. Anyway, 2 years went by. I showcased the game at a couple of events. The most notable is probably the Independent Games Festival, IGF, in San Francisco in 2018. It's kind of one of those big indie game competitions. And I sent Baba Is You there in an unfinished state. And I won 2 awards there, Excellence in Design and Best Student Game. So that was pretty cool. And a very nice thing about these events was that when people came to me and played the game and gave me feedback and like expressed their opinions about it, it gave me, first of all, obviously, feedback. I could see that what works and what doesn't. The game turned out to be really, really, really difficult for many players, so that was very valuable in trying to make it easier. I didn't succeed, but I tried. Another thing was that this gave me encouragement. A lot of people told me that they liked the idea, that it has potential. And when you make a game, even if it's just 2 years of working on a game, it's very easy to get into the point where you start kind of doubting yourself, to feel that, hey, is this actually good? Maybe I'm making the worst game ever and I didn't realize. So going to somewhere where people say to your face that, hey, I like this, it's very nice for encouragement. And then finally, when I came closer to finishing the game, a colleague from the company MP2 Games offered to port the game, so we were able to release it on the Nintendo Switch trademark, which was super nice. Yeah, I guess I'm pretty much on time, or even ahead of time, so we might have time for all those neat things I had planned, so that's nice. As a kind of some final points about the game, like why do I think the game is interesting to people? I guess the final line there should come first. Something that I usually use as a goal as a game developer is that I want to kind of amaze the player, surprise the player, just in any way. Like I really, really love it when I make a game and someone plays it and I can see their reaction, and the reaction is that they get surprised in a good way. Like they do not get frustrated, but more like, yeah, I guess amazed is a pretty nice word to put it. Especially if someone plays the game and they like burst out laughing because something was cool. That's something I strive for as a game developer. And I think Baba Is You kind of manages to do that for a lot of players because, okay, Baba itself is kind of this odd creature that doesn't exist in the real world, but walls and flags, also like flags as the victory, like goalposts, rocks, water, lava, all these things are things that exist in the real world. Also stuff like keys and doors. And in Baba Is You, you have these things that are kind of familiar, like walls. And usually, wall is stop, as in real world. Usually in the real world, walls are solid. You cannot move through walls. But what Baba Is You does is that sometimes the wall might actually be you, or it might be a win, or it might be something else. And that is kind of amusing when you get into a situation where the game requires to realize that, hey, in this game, the wall doesn't have to be what walls are in the real world. It can be something else. I think that's a kind of a big part of why the game might be interesting to some people. One of my favorite of these kind of funny interactions in the game is that you have a locked door and you have a key, but for example, you might have too many doors and only one key. And what you have to do is to say that wall is shut, which kind of turns the wall into a locked door. And then instead of opening the door with the key, you can open the wall and escape a room. That is something that I feel that kind of conveys this idea of changing the meaning of familiar elements really well. The second point is kind of arbitrary, kind of generic. Usually it's nice when, like many of my favorite indie games do a thing where they pick up some very simple concept. For example, there's the fairly old indie game Braid from 2008, where you can rewind time. And the entire game is just puzzles where this rewinding time thing is explored as deeply as possible. And I think it's cool, usually, even if some of those ideas are not really interesting, like when you explore a concept, you find some stuff that is kind of technically nice, but maybe not the coolest thing. But it's still interesting to see a game explore even those less interesting ideas. So in Baba Is You, something I tried to do was also try to kind of explore the concept as deeply as possible. And over those 2 years of development, I several times bumped into something that, like a deeper level of exploring the game. For example, at some point during development, I realized that there could be a word called text, and you can say text is you, and what that actually means that the words themselves become you, the player. And that was kind of an interesting meta layer of interaction in the game. I was happy that I got that idea or someone suggested it or something, because I felt that it, yeah, as mentioned, kind of explored the idea slightly more deeply. What had I written even here? Oh yeah, well, yeah. As a kind of a advertisement, we are developing a level editor for the game because a lot of people seem to enjoy the kind of, yeah, the sandboxy, playing around with things aspect of the game. So it would be super nice to allow people to kind of see what they can do, figure out their own puzzles, or just like play around. I feel that is also something that the game does. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so, oh, whoa, it's less than half an hour. So that's nice. I guess what I'll do is I'll showcase some funny things about the game, and then I'll take questions, and that'll be that. So let's see if everything works out. Let's go into the game itself. I have fairly little mouse space, so yeah, okay, obviously I have a version that doesn't allow me to actually showcase anything. So let's exit the game and actually go into Multimedia Fusion, the program I used to make the game. So let's dive really deep into this development something. Yeah, okay, now we have a version with this button, level editor here. And we can go into the game itself and see all these 226 levels that the game has. But I'm actually, there are so many of these that I might have a problem of picking something from here. So let's make something. Actually, this might be a really bad idea. Let's go away from here. I don't want to bore you with showcasing the level editor, so let's instead go into the game itself. This is a easier way because then I can't accidentally show you something that is unfinished or really bad. I can show you the cool stuff as if. So, for example, I mentioned the word empty, and I think that is possibly one of the cooler things about the game, like one of those words that explore the idea of the game really nicely. So here we have a level. At the top left corner, we have Baba is you, there's flag is win, cloud is stop. So these bright blue things, they are clouds. They are basically just walls here. And then we have the rule belt is shift. So we see here on the right these conveyor belts. Shift means that Baba cannot move through them because they push Baba downwards. Pretty simple. And then here in the middle, we have empty is. So right now, empty is nothing. What we could say, for example, is empty is stop, which means that all the spaces in the level that don't contain anything right now are now stop. So now actually Baba cannot move around anymore because the empty space is stop. But fortunately, actually, not unfortunately, I have an undo button. We could also say that empty is cloud. All the empty space turns into cloud. And the actual solution to the level is to say belt is empty. So the conveyor belts disappear. They are now empty. Yeah. Or as a kind of to showcase the game having these alternative solutions, we could also say that empty is flag. And because flag is win, we now have a bunch of ways to win the level. Yeah, thank you. And I think I'll show one more thing, and then we'll go to move onwards. Is this? Yeah, it's this one. Or actually, there might be one more thing after this. But yeah, we'll see. So again, a bunch of stuff. A big problem when designing the game was that when you have a lot of these rules on the screen, it gets hard to go through all of them and keep them in your mind. So there was kind of a difficulty when developing the game to kind of make those levels with all the rules they require, but keeping it as simple as possible. There are some levels that are not simple enough, but I tried my best. So here we have skull is defeat, and rock is stop, and flag is win on the top left corner. So we have these red skulls here. If Baba moves on top of them, Baba disappears because they are defeat. They are dangerous. At first, I used the word kill. Skull is kill. But the game is pretty cute. I didn't want to make the game very violent, so kill felt too violent. Defeat is less violent as a word. And because the top left corner of the level is kind of fenced off with those rocks, and the rocky stop rule is inside that fence, I actually cannot really do anything with those 3 rules on the top left corner. Instead, we have wall is stop. I can break the rule wall is stop to move through these walls, as explained. And then we have Baba is you. The solution is pretty simple. This is a very early level, but something that I really like about, something I really like about the possibilities of this game is that we can say, wall is you, and now I just move around all the walls, and I can win the level with them. Or alternatively, I could do kind of a similar thing that I already did in the previous level I was showcasing, and say wall is Baba. So now we have a bunch of Babas in the level. Yeah. And I guess there's a final thing here. So something that I wish I had more ideas for, but that I feel would be kind of unexplored territory with this idea, is this concept of, because in the game, all the things that matter in a level are the rules. Without the rules, nothing does nothing. How do you even say that? Like everything does nothing. No. Anyway, so things only have meaning if they have a rule attached to them. And in some situations, the difficulty of a puzzle might not come from the rules that are in the level kind of restricting the player, or the player having to play around with those rules, but instead from the rules that are not in the level. So for example, in this level, this is one of the very first levels. I made this for the Game Jam originally. We have Baba is you, grass is stop, so Baba cannot move through these patches of grass here in the center of this grass yard. And then we have flag and win, but no is. So flag is not win, flag is nothing right now. We cannot win the level by touching the flag. And the grass is positioned so that when I try to kind of extract these flag and win rules to do something with them, they get stuck. I'm stuck here. And what this level requires you to understand is that if a thing doesn't have a rule, it does nothing, and you have to kind of give up the kind of concepts you might have about the game or things in games in general. So the trick here is that wall is not stop. I can move through walls. But because I think this is the 7th level of the game, and before this, almost every level has had the rule, wall is stop. Especially if a player spends more time on a level, if they get stuck in a level that has the rule, wall is stop, they might kind of grow to assume that wall is always stop. Especially because in many games, like if you say wall is stop, it's obvious, wall is stop. But in this level, that is not the case, and it might be difficult to kind of figure it out. And I think there would be, as mentioned, like more potential for this kind of design where the difficulty comes from what is missing instead of what is there. But someone else is probably better at thinking that way than I am. So I made the game I could. Anyway, so I guess that's time for questions. I might be somewhat early, but that's probably a better thing than being late. So, any questions? I can't see if someone is raising their hand. I probably cannot see it, but I'll try.
Hi. Here.
Okay. Yep.
I'm Angel Sucasas from El País newspaper. I have a question about the creature itself because I love Baba.
Okay.
And I want to know how the concept occurred to you and if your relationship with the creature changed during the development, the meaning behind the creature, because it's the only fantasy element that the game has, as you said.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. When I was making the game at Nordic Game Jam, I have had to use really simple graphics, no animation, just a single sprite that moves around because I wanted to concentrate on the idea. And I made Baba originally this kind of a robot thing. In my eyes, it was a robot. It was a very low resolution sprite, so it left a lot to people's interpretation. And after the release of the game, after the jam, an indie developer friend of mine, Jason Boyer, made a really nice piece of fan art of Baba pushing around things. And in that piece of fan art, they interpreted the robot as a kind of a bipedal goat person, because the robot had like 2 antennae. And yeah, it was a very small sprite, so it was very easy to say that, okay, those antennae are actually horns, so it's a goat. And when I decided on what to do with the art of the game, what kind of art style to go for, I realized that actually a robot is maybe kind of clinical, kind of boring, not super interesting, and instead going for this kind of cute creature thing, as Jason had done, might be a good idea. So I made Baba this kind of a nondescript creature. People have told me that Baba might be a bunny or a cat or a dog or a capybara or a elephant. Yeah, there's a bunch of things people see in Baba. But actually, I intentionally wanted to make it so that Baba the creature is kind of nothing specific. But the name Baba actually comes from a pretty random source. There are two creatures in the game, Baba and Keke. Keke is kind of this red bipedal character moving around. And there's an old psychological experiment where people were shown like a wobbly round shape and a spiky shape. And they were asked which one of these shapes is called Boba and which one of these is called Kiki. And people usually say that the round wobbly shape, I almost said creature, but like the shape is Boba, and the spiky shape is Kiki. And when I had to kind of quickly decide a name for Baba that fit into 4 letters, so I could make this graphical tile out of it. And I was reminded of that Boba Kiki experiment, and I was like, sure. I don't know why, but let's go with this. And then I just turned Baba or Boba into Baba and Kiki into Keke. So I took heavy inspiration from there. It's been kind of funny because Baba, someone told me that Baba in Spanish means spit or saliva. And Baba means like a rude word for an old woman in many Eastern European or like Russian and many languages. It was maybe not the best choice for a name of a character. And Kiki or Keke is actually kind of a middle-aged male person's name in Finnish. So you always run into those kinds of problems when you give these kind of simplistic 4-letter names for things. But all in all, I think things went pretty well. But yeah, Baba is some creature with a name completely unrelated to anything. I guess that's the answer to the question. Yeah,
do you think you will keep on using multimedia fusion for your future games, or will you switch to another game engine?
That is a very difficult question. I tried to move on from multimedia fusion for the first time in like 2012 or something. I've tried to kind of move on from it because a big problem with a game creation tool that doesn't have any kind of programming, or even one that has, is that because it's not a pure programming language, you will eventually run into a situation where you cannot do something that you would want to do because the program is more limited and you don't have the tools to kind of bypass the limitations. Multimedia Fusion has had a lot of like user-made plugins that increase its usability, and I've been really like reliant on some of those. For example, in Baba Is You, I use a plugin that lets me use the scripting language Lua with it. And actually, most of Baba Is You's puzzle logic is made in Lua instead of Multimedia Fusion's own coding, which is very useful because it's more powerful than Multimedia Fusion's own thing. But I think I would it might be a smart idea for me to move on to something else, but it's very hard because I've been using programs of the same family, starting with the Games Factory that was really, I don't even remember when the Games Factory was released, like 1997 or something. So I've been using those for like 15 years. I'm very used to the workflow on them. And especially earlier, when I didn't even know this Lua scripting language, every time I tried to learn something like an actual programming language, I ran into the trouble of, this is very hard to understand. There's this program called Multimedia Fusion that I know really well that is very easy to understand for me. I want to stay with it. But I think it will depend on what kind of a game I make next. If I get some kind of an idea that Multimedia Fusion really cannot make, like a 3D game, for example, I might be forced to switch to something else. But if I can get more ideas that I can make Multimedia Fusion, I might stick with it. Sorry about the kind of vague answer, but that's probably the most truthful one I can give at this moment.
You said that you don't make games professionally, right?
I don't think I said that specifically, but yeah.
So, do you have any advice for the people who want to make games professionally? Make an approach to the people that aren't that close to video games or the making of video games. Like, for example, my parents who don't have any idea about video games, but I would like to make them understand a little bit the video games and the making of them. You have some kind of experience of not taking this like a job.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of clarify, I didn't think of video games as my job for a very long time because as mentioned, I was kind of afraid of certain things about the working full-time on games. But I guess when I released my first commercial game in 2015, I kind of finally admitted to myself that, hey, I'm spending like several hours every single day doing this stuff. Maybe it's actually my job instead of just a hobby. But I feel that obviously if someone is intentionally not interested in games, like if they make a point of not being interested in games, then I don't think there's really that much you can do to kind of convince them to be interested in them. But especially nowadays, that almost everyone plays games on some level. Maybe not everyone's parents, but like I think, for example, in my age group, almost everyone, even if they're not interested in games, they play them. So I feel that a lot of people are kind of, if someone explains the idea of a game in kind of easy to understand terms that doesn't kind of go more deeply into the concept, but more kind of generally explains the idea of like, this is something that is interactive and you can control these things that you see there and they interact in some ways. I think, like when I think of my own parents, I tend to kind of try to convey the idea of ideas of the things I make, unless they are violent, to my parents, because I think they kind of appreciate having this kind of general knowledge of what I do. But I don't think it would be very fruitful maybe to try to make them kind of fully get into the concept. And when it comes to my, for example, my student friends who are not game developers, who are maybe not interested in games other than as maybe mobile games, for a long time, I was afraid of talking about making games to them because I felt that it was kind of something that they would laugh at, or be like, they would say that, oh, games, those are boring. And then eventually it turned out that they were actually like saying that, hey, I'm a game developer, was something that they are not used to. And they felt that, hey, that's cool, you make games, that's nice. What is it like? And then I could kind of, again, maybe not go into like extreme detail into what I do, but still kind of explain myself. So this is, again, a really vague answer. I think it really depends on what kind of people you are talking about. But generally for me, the experience has been that people are actually pretty excited about learning about games on a general level, maybe not on a very in-depth level. Hopefully that gave some kind of a...
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question, which is, being a solo developer, how do you think of midterm and long-term goals when you're developing a game?
What do you mean? That's a pretty general. So,
how do you organize your time and your resources so you can achieve little achievements while you are developing the game? So you know that with these little things that you are making every day, you are accomplishing something bigger that will eventually be a full game.
That is a very, very good question. I think for me personally, just kind of trying to have as clear of an idea of what the kind of general shape of the game will be. Not really the details. It might not be a good idea to try to map out everything beforehand because it's not going to go that way. Something will change, and then you might be in trouble if you are kind of too reliant on that very definitive plan. But kind of trying to have some kind of an idea of the scope, or not have an idea of the scope, but have some kind of a point where you know that when I get to this point, I can call the game finished at any point. I'm not anymore kind of in an unfinished state. I'm in a finished state, but I can still add more stuff. Kind of trying to figure out what that point is, is important. And when you have that, you don't really have to, as mentioned, like meticulously map out everything else immediately. But then you can start kind of figuring out milestones and like major elements that need to be finished, and then in turn divide those elements into, for me, for example, to-do lists are very satisfying. Like making a list of things I need to do, and then getting to mark off those things. It feels fun. Sometimes when I'm actually managed to do them. So, for example, in Baba Is You, when I started making a full game, as mentioned, I had like a very different idea of how many levels I would have eventually. I didn't really have a plan of how long I would spend on the game. Initially, I think I planned I would spend 1 year on it, and then it took 2 years. But I think I still had kind of like I had a sense of where I want to go with the game. It still grew during development. I mentioned kind of getting more ideas of these kind of more meta, more deeply exploring concepts. So those kind of inflated the end product actually quite a bit. But I still kind of, for example, after only, I think, 2 months of development, I already had an idea of what the final level of the game could be. And I kind of, even during the first half a year of developing the game, I tried to kind of brainstorm ideas of what the kind of end point of the game would be, because I felt that, okay, this idea needs some kind of a cool thing you do in the last level, like something that is different from what you usually do. And I felt that figuring that out was very important. So I spent quite a bit of time initially figuring that part out, because then when I had that idea, I could start making the kind of middle point of the game, the actual levels, while still knowing where the end point is going to be. And then I think of the 2 years I spent on the game, the first year was spent largely on kind of making up new ideas, new words, being kind of more free form. And then when I felt that I had used up all the like really good ideas I could get or figure out, I started kind of concentrating more on figuring out the like menus, what kind of a map the game would have, how do you actually get from the beginning to the end point, showcasing the game to get feedback, stuff like that. So yeah, it's again with these awfully vague answers, but I feel that kind of get a general idea and then start dividing it to first general flagstones, I don't know, like things, and then divide those into smaller things. Might be how I would approach. Obviously, when I say this, it sounds really like I know what I'm doing. I do this very professionally. I have a very good schedule. In truth, everything always changes. Plans change. The idea grows or shrinks or something. You can't really account for everything. And saying that I would be a very kind of professional or have a good direction when making a game would be a huge lie. So take this with a grain of salt. But yep.
Here.
Yep.
I'm currently trying to recreate the main mechanics of the game in Unity because I really loved it, and all the time playing it, I was like, this will be a lot of fun making it. And now that I see you have a level editor, I wanted to know if you are planning to release it like part of the game in an update or something, because it would be really cool to make your own levels and share them.
Yeah, we are working on like an official level editor right now. I don't know when it's going to be released, but it was something that I felt like some people told me that maybe I shouldn't make a level editor because it's making a actually polished level editor that people can use that doesn't break down is a lot of work. So it might not be advisable to try to do that if you make a game that could have a level editor. But I felt that Baba Is You's idea was so much about like this sandboxiness, this toying around, that not having a level editor would be a huge crime. You can already, this is a secret, but maybe I should like whisper into the microphone instead. But yeah, if you play the game on PC, the level editor is actually like as an unfinished, unofficial thing that has bugs and stuff. But it's still there, like the editor I showed you there. So if you go into Steam and look around a bit, you might find directions on how to enable the level editor in the game if you have it on PC. So I didn't actually say that. It's not officially available, but just you might be able to have some experiences with the level editor, even as it is right now.
Hey, here.
Yep.
So, in my opinion, there's like two kind of ways to do games. Like there's ones that use the same things that other games have done, and others that push the medium forward, or ideas, or concepts. In the case of your game, I think it's the second thing compared to the first.
Thanks.
So in my opinion, do you think like all your games need to be like that? They need to push a concept forward. They need to give an idea to players, or it doesn't matter? Like, what's your opinion on this subject? Do you think games need to push the medium forward always? No. What's your take on this?
Well, I guess the simple answer is that I don't think that has to be the case. But to give a slightly more elaborate answer is that I think that basically every single game ever, apart from some very early stuff and some very rare examples, all games are built on ideas from existing games. And usually, from what I've seen, the games that seem the most innovative or original are usually games that combine enough ideas from other games that it creates something that looks new, or they take some idea that has already been done and explores it, as I mentioned in the presentation, explores it as deeply as possible to kind of see what comes out of it. And that can seem interesting because when the game kind of concentrates on a single idea really, really hard, it can bring out something that other games haven't explored because they haven't kind of they've only done like a more kind of surface level exploration. And I think, for example, many of these block pushing games, even though they are block pushing games by nature, I think many of them, especially the ones I've enjoyed the most, have done kind of a thing where they take this kind of a generic old idea of block pushing, and they take a particular twist on it, and then explore that twist really, really deeply. And that at least sometimes creates something that feels innovative or original. So I think I would prefer to see games generally try to strive for a situation where they couldn't be explained as a kind of like this is Zelda but with Dark Souls elements. But instead to say that this is Zelda with Dark Souls elements, but also elements from, I don't know, Mario and Doom and Tetris, and kind of try to combine enough ideas that you can't just very easily describe a game based on other games. But it's not even like the most important goal. Obviously, the most important goal, especially as an indie developer, is to make a game that you personally enjoy to make. Like my first commercial title, Environmental Station Alpha, was a Metroid clone. So I'm not the best person to demand originality from games. But I guess, like, personally, I find the most enjoyment when I'm making a game that I feel has some kind of a original idea to it. So that is something that I would want to strive for. So I guess.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Here. I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm also a big fan of game jams. But usually when I go to a game jam, I just do like the random thing I come up with, and then I toss that apart.
Yep.
Which is part of a beautiful big picture of pointless games. So how was and how did it felt to change from this game jam experiment thing to a commercial thing, or to a game that you took seriously enough to spend 2 years to work on?
Not super different, because for me, well, I have a day job that I do. Like Baba Is You was done entirely on my free time, so to say. And during the development, I was still attending game jams, because for me, game jams are almost kind of a relaxing thing, because it's like just do something. You don't have to worry about it later. If you don't like it, you can just throw it away. It's a kind of gives some nice freedom that like serious game development doesn't have. So for Baba Is You, I feel that the biggest problems are usually related to motivation and like those worries about marketability I mentioned, kind of like having to convince yourself and other people that, hey, this is a game that, if it's going to be a commercial game, that is going to kind of be liked by enough people that it justifies making it commercial, or that you are yourself happy with the end result. Because when you work on the game for a longer time, it's very easy to start, as I mentioned, like doubting yourself. But apart from that, I feel that when it comes to the actual development, the only place where the difference between making a jam game and a full game really shows is the final bit, the kind of polishing bit. In game jams, you don't have to polish the game, which is really nice. It's super nice to be able to release an unfinished thing, and people are like, that's fine, it was made in 48 hours. But in the full game, you actually have to, you don't have to, but many people prefer to try to polish things and fix bugs and realize the idea fully. And that is the most tedious part of the development, but also the biggest addition to serious game development. Is that, yeah, okay.
Well, just one last question then.
Okay. Yep. Are you planning on releasing any mobile version of the game?
It would be super nice. It's kind of like some of the plans we are looking for are still kind of under the wraps, but it's definitely something I would really like to look at, because I feel that the game would work pretty well on mobile. There are already been some mobile clones on the market, so releasing on mobile would also be smart in that sense, but we'll see what happens. If you follow me on Twitter, you might get news about this.
Thank you very much, Arvi.
Thank you.
Thank you.